When I surf the web for reading from Christian book sites like Cokesbury, there are usually some interesting titles, but some of the most interesting things to me are not the titles themselves, but the subtitles. Many of them seem to be specifically for clergy, but many others say things like for the informed layperson. Now, that kind of strikes me as odd. Imagine if the book were to begin, this book is not written for the professional theologian or even for the informed layperson. Rather, I want to speak to the uninformed layperson. Who'd want to buy that book, right? Wouldn't it be much better to be misinformed than to be considered uninformed? Nobody wants to be known as uninformed. Probably one of the reasons that you and I are here on a Sunday morning watching this is that we want to be well informed about the Christian faith. And isn't that right? Because of this, there are a couple of things that bother me. Well, not necessarily bother, but are interesting to me about today's parable. And isn't there always something that is bothersome? I guess I'm naturally skeptical. Anyway, so let's look at this parable. In the end, it says, he will gather all of the nations before him. The phrase, all the nations, panta ethne, which might be better translated not as all the nations, but rather as all the Gentiles, all ethnic groups. Any nation other than Israel itself is ethne. So it's not the judging of individuals, but it's the judging of nations. That's one point. So it says literally, on the last day, all the Gentile nations will gather before the throne to be judged. And well, that includes you and I and our nation or our grouping and every other non-Jew in the world, or at least our ethnicities or our groupings by national identity. Long ago, God told Israel that it would be judged on the basis of its fidelity to the revealed way of God as found in the Torah. But Gentiles cannot be judged on the basis of Torah, even though they know of the Torah sometimes. They have never really lived with it. They've never studied it in their homes, had it taught to them daily, and walked around with it on their foreheads, so to speak, as the Jews have. It continues, and as a shepherd separates sheep and goats. At the end of the day, the goats have to be separated because they usually require more warmth than sheep, so they put them in an inner pen rather than toward the outside when it starts getting cold outside. The job of separation is really a pretty simple one because sheep tended to be more white with a little speckling and goats tended to be black or more darkly speckled. So even in the twilight, it's easy to tell one from the other. So it is with the final judgment. It is relatively easy to tell those which go on the right from those who go on the left. Though in this case, they're separated by actions. The king will say, "Come, you nations that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food, and I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink, and I was a stranger, and you took me in. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me." Literally, you gathered me in. You synagogued me. You gathered me in and treated me like family. And those of the Gentile nations will say, "Oh, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger?" Who, us? I don't remember ever having visited you or clothed you or given you something to drink or maybe even not even met you. Right here is about the most interesting part of this story to me. I understand when the unrighteous. Those who failed to give food and drink and welcome didn't know what they were doing. Of course, you expect that. You expect the unrighteous to be, well, ignorant. One expects the non-religious, those outside the fold, those who have never attended Sunday school or listened to a sermon, not to know anything about being especially good. We go to church in normal times, at least, on Sunday morning. We listen to Sunday school lessons and sermons in order to be in the know, right? To figure out what's righteous and what's not, to discover the basis upon which God's judgments will be made, right? So it's no shock in this story to hear the dumb, unrighteous scratching their heads in befuddlement, asking, Lord, when did we see you? Surprise! Should have come to church. Inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. But the truly shocking part is, though, is that the righteous don't know. They don't know what they were doing either. The righteous, those who are called blessed or blessed, those gathered in, are as dumb as the unrighteous. They are both uninformed. Both the sheep and the goats ask the same question. Lord, when did we see you? When did we do this? We usually think of our sin, our unrighteousness, in terms of ignorance and misinformation. I didn't know what I was doing. I got drunk. I was using drugs. I was overcome with anger and jealousy and lost my senses. We didn't know what we were doing. Ignorance is supposed to lead to sin and unrighteousness. And yet here in this story about judgment, the righteous are also ignorant. Who? Us? Me? To be honest, I don't remember ever having visited you, clothed you, given you something to drink, went to prison to see you. Their righteous ignorance is an interesting contrast with us. For why are we here? So that we can know what's going on with God, where all of this is moving, what all of this means, and how it ends in the end, right? Yet here in this story, the blessed who are being welcomed into the kingdom established before the foundation of the cosmos are those who don't know and haven't even a clue as to their own goodness. So their enlightenment then comes in the king's answer to them. Truly, inasmuch as you have done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me. Throughout the Gospel of Matthew, the followers of Jesus are depicted as the little ones, people who are meek and lowly and poor and powerless, with no one to protect them or speak up for them other than Jesus. These outsiders, these ethnic groups, these Gentiles are judged on the basis of how they dealt with the least of Jesus' family, his little ones. Can you begin to get a sense of how threatening this story is to someone who's in the business of putting people in the know, religiously speaking? The temple authorities, for example. Well, I'm a preacher and I'm in the business of calling people to the knowledge of Christ. And I've always thought it was important to be informed and understand what God wants of us. And I know you very nice, politically correct people, well, most of you people, think that you've now dealt with your issues. You're working to become anti-racist, non-sexist, less prideful, open to all ages and races and classes of people. And take great pleasure in being knowledgeable of the things of God, I think. You know that you would give a cup of water, a free meal, a prison or hospital visit, minister to the sick, wouldn't you? Now, we know that there may be right-wing, ignorant fundamentalist churches who wallow in all sorts of biblical hocus pocus and misinformation on Sunday, ignoring all the passages about helping the widow and the orphan and welcoming the stranger, and only focusing on personal piety. But this, our congregation, our denomination, we're not one of them. When we hear the judgments of God, we smugly assert, well, sheep here, non-racist, non-sexist, donate to the food bank, drink fair trade coffee, even vote for all the right candidates with great morals, give money to my church, donate stuff for lots of good causes. Get our progressive theology with the United Methodists. We're informed. Surprise. People invited into the kingdom in this parable didn't know either. They haven't been baptized. They don't know the Apostles' Creed or the Lord's Prayer. They never laid eyes on Jesus. And yet in their actions, they are judged to be more like disciples than some actual disciples, more like family than Jesus' own family. The prophets spoke of those who do right because the law of God is written on their hearts. They don't live by the book. They do what they do because it is so much a part of who they are, part of their very being, not about a book. Methodist minister told us about his visit to Cuba. This was quite a while ago. He met with an official of the government, a man named Santiago. Of course, he was a communist. During their conversation, the official said, well, this revolution will not be judged by your standards of success. Our revolution will be judged on the basis of whether or not we've fed the hungry and clothed the naked and took in the strangers and visited the sick. That's how we will be judged. And the minister said, well, Captain Santiago, are you aware that you're quoting Matthew 25? And Santiago said, I don't know anything about that. Santiago may not know Jesus, but perhaps Jesus knows Santiago. Am I saying that's better if we were uninformed? Would it be better if we never came to church to try to search out some of the answers to life's questions? Actually, I have to believe that we are better off coming and being informed and working out life's questions together and trying to better our understanding of righteousness together. Those who happen to do what is right without a religious education are the lucky ones, I think. They've lucked out, thank goodness, and managed to find a good and moral path without our help. But I wouldn't recommend it for anyone. It's not easy doing things like that on your own, good things without the support of family and friends and beloved neighbors and teachers and preachers and other helpers to give us encouragement and help us along the way. But I am saying that we need not be motivated by a promise of some heavenly reward if we're truly listening to our hearts. Righteousness is not about a ticket to heaven. It's about listening to the voice of God so that we are truly so connected, so very connected with the heart of God, that goodness and gratefulness and optimism and generosity just come naturally to us. Wouldn't it be better if we do to the least of these because of the law that's written on our hearts rather than the law that's written in a book. Better that there be no thought of reward or any understanding of our own goodness. Better that we be ignorant of our own righteousness and wallow in our own pride, that we don't even know that we are being wonderful. Better that we be righteous, not just because we were taught to be righteous, but because it is a part of our inward fiber, our character, our soul. But until the day that we have righteousness totally ingrained into our fiber, yes, we ought to. We just have to keep coming to the church to try to be better informed, to teach each other, to model for each other, and to our nation as well about what it means to follow Christ and to find encouragement from one another, to live life better, doing what Christ calls us to do in this world. For when you have done it unto the least of these, you have done it unto me. And that's the way it is in the judgment. Amen.